do I look at Wayne?
Whichever you want to do, you feel more comfortable.
Okay, we're rolling.
All right, this is an interview at the Days Inn, Nanuet, New York. It is the 28th of September, 2004, approximately 9 a.m. The interviewers are Wayne Clark and Mike Russert. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Yes, my name is Warren Inglese, I-N-G-L-E-S-E, and I was born in Mount Vernon, New York, July 13th, 1925.
Okay. What was your educational background prior to entering service?
I was in high school, finishing high school. One morning in March, I was still 17 years old and walking to high school, I knew I was going to enlist in the Army. And as I passed the railroad station, I bought a round-trip ticket to New York City and went down to Whitehall Street. I went through the process, and I ended up in a room with a bunch of other guys raising a right hand and being sworn into the United States Army Enlisted Reserve. Because at 17, you're able to enlist in the service without parents' consent. And they won't call you until you were 18. And when I came home, I didn't know how I was going to tell my folks what I did, but I had this card, it was like a postcard, and it had my name and it had a number on it. And I showed it to my dad. He was in the air service in World War I. And I told them I enlisted, and they kind of expected I would be doing that. I said they wouldn't call me until I finished high school or when
Now, why did you pick the Army?
Well, you know the old saying, I could walk a lot further than I could swim. And I really had it, I thought I'd go for the Air Corps. That's why I enlisted, because I always liked aviation. So my dad looked at the card I brought home and he said, "Oh, you're going to have something more important than your name on this card." It was your serial number. And I didn't know what a serial number was, but it was 12220000. I was in the right place at the right time, but it was an easy number to remember. So I had some time. I had a few months before I was going to graduate, and the school offered a program of working on farms, victory farms for farmers, because they didn't have many people working for them. And I thought maybe it'd be a good toughening up experience, to work on a farm and be ready for the Army. So about 2.5 months before graduation, I left and went up to agricultural school in St. Lawrence University for a couple of weeks, learning how to milk cows and hook up horses to wagons. And I thought my buddy and I would be together on a farm, but no, I was shipped out to a farm on the Canadian border all by myself. My farm, just a farmer and his wife and myself. And so it was a pretty tough life, getting up at 6 in the morning, sleeping in the attic. And farmer in the morning in the mudroom, he putting on our boots, he had asthma, he couldn't talk, and I was so damn mad I didn't feel like talking, so we never said a word. I'd go out and round up the cows for milking, and by 7:30 coming back into the house for breakfast, then we finally said good morning. But a couple of months of hay and allergies, which I developed, I went to see a doctor in Watertown. He said, "Now you better go home, son." He said, "Your eyes are swollen." And so my $1 a week job, I left and went back home. And still had a little time at school. I missed graduation, and I had some time, and I got a job with American Airlines out in a field in LaGuardia, working on engines, taking them off the commercial planes, and about 3 or 4 weeks later, I got my orders to, I was 18 on July 13th, and I was called to active duty on August 13th, 1943. And I was told to report to Camp Upton, New York, and there was a group of us in this auditorium, and they said, you know, you enlisted fellas, you thought you were going to get in the Air Corps, but you're not. The Air Corps is filled up. You're going to end up in the infantry. He said, but we have a program for you guys to go to college and take an entrance exam. You fellas that pass it, you're going to go to college for 2 years for engineering. Wow, we thought that's good. The war will be over by then. We have a college education. It's an accelerated 4-year course into 2 years into 4 years. So those of us that passed, they were shipped out to Fort Benning for basic training. And we did all the usual, about 13 weeks of hiking, shooting, marching. And then we got a furlough. I came back and I was in a group that was shipped out to Eastern Kentucky State. The program was called ASTP, Army Specialized Training Program. And it looked like a good life. I mean, you were free on weekends, went to school. They weren't teaching you anything because the history professor, all you have to do is mention baseball and he'd talk baseball. And the English professor, he couldn't speak but move his arms and mouth for a while, and then all of a sudden make a few utterances. And I found the whole program really not going anywhere. You weren't getting any commission. The Army did that because the Navy had a V-12 program, and they took all the Ivy League colleges, and you become an ensign. But in the Army, you couldn't even get a PFC out of it. So I had my doubts about sticking with this program. And one evening, some fellows from the 82nd Airborne came down looking for volunteers. And a buddy of mine and I, we both said, okay, that's for us. We'll try the 82nd. And we said we'll both go together or not go at all. And when we went to sign up, they asked him about any broken bones, and he just had a broken ankle from high school football. And they said, no, we can't take you. We wouldn't take a chance with you. So I backed out. And a couple of weeks later, they came down from the 20th Armored Division at Camp Campbell looking for volunteers, and we said, okay, that's for us. We'll ride tanks. So we volunteered, and it was only 2 of us out of the whole college that I know of. And we went to see the captain, and we had 2 captains. It was such a good deal. We had 2 commanding officers, and they said, oh, what do you want to leave this program? It's so good. You know, it makes us look bad if somebody gets out of it. But we said, no, we wanted to go. So we were shipped out. We moved out to the 20th Armored Division at Camp Campbell, and we put in a medium tank for about a day or so until the first sergeant came over and said, hey, you guys, you had infantry basic training. Fort Benning, you're going to be in the armored infantry. So from tanks, we went to half tracks, and we thought, well, it's still better than walking, riding half tracks. And I liked the patch of the armored division. It was a big triangle with a track and a cannon and a lightning. Better than an ASTP patch I would never wear because it wasn't for me. And I all of a sudden noticed about a month or so later, some of the guys in my class, I saw them walking around Camp Campbell around the PX and all. Gee, what happened? I found out the whole program folded up. They all ended up in infantry outfits. So it went along in the Armored Division, maneuvers, and I got to be a scout for the company, and I thought that was a good deal because on maneuvers I'd hit the ground first when the Red Army would fire their blanks at me, and they'd have to run up and make a skirmish line on me, so I never had to do all that running, and they had to. So, but then I saw these light planes, the L-4 Piper Cubs flying overhead, and found out that they're used for spotting artillery in the field artillery. So I said, gee, maybe I can get back into, try to get into those, because I enjoyed flying. And so I went over to the field artillery headquarters and told them I'd like to apply for being a pilot. In the meantime, I was flying at a local airport at Camp Camel called Outlaw Airport. I was taking flying lessons in a biplane, and the instructor liked me and gave me a lot of extra time, and he said, let's bust a hole in the clouds and we go flying. I probably had about 3.5 hours actually, so I was an ace pilot by then. But when the captain found out, I went over his head and didn't ask for permission to go to the field artillery. He said, I don't like anyone going over my head. I don't like the Air Corps. And I'm going to ship you out. Each company in the battalion had a quota each month to ship out replacement riflemen. So I was number 1 on the list. And so I think I may have had another furlough. And I was shipped, I thought I was going to go to Camp Upton. I shipped out to Fort Meade, Maryland, with 7 other guys from my company. And from there, we were taken by train at night to the piers in New York, and we boarded the Aquitania. The funny thing, when you're going on the gangplank there's a lieutenant sitting at a card table, and you have to, through many times, repeat your last name and last 4 numbers of your serial number. And as I passed him, I said, Inglese, 0 Zypher. He said, what the hell's that? I said, Inglese, 0000, because I get tired of saying 0. Anyway, as you walked up the gangplank, they gave you a little piece of paper, and it gave you a detail what you were going to do on a ship. And it said on mine, it said wet canteen. I didn't know what wet canteen was. I asked several guys, and about 2 days later I found out it meant soda. It was a soda dispensing canteen. By that time they were all out of soda, so I didn't have any detail. But and we had a PBY giving us escort, and we had a blimp in a couple of days, because we were going unescorted. And about the 4th night, I think it was, general quarters was sounded. We put on our life preservers and got up on deck. They fired a cannon they had in the back, and we didn't know what was going on. It was a very dark night. We found out later they fired at a surface German submarine, and we went approximately 300 miles off course to get out of ways. We were very fast, but we could outrun a submarine, but I don't know if we could outrun a torpedo. But we spent a couple extra days at sea. By the time we got to Gourock, Scotland, we were glad to see land, and we did have an escort of British Spitfires for 2 days too. And we boarded trains in Gourock and went down to Warminster Barracks in England, which was a armored school. And we camped out on the side of the hill in pup tents, and a couple of us managed to sneak away at night and go to a local bar and have a couple of beers and play darts. And then we were shipped out to the seaport town of Weymouth on the English Channel. And I was amazed because it was a real resort town. It had a boardwalk, and it had a 5 and 10 cent store, a Woolworth store. It felt like I was home. But because we were restricted to the ship that we were on, it was a British troop transport of some kind, but it's like more like a destroyer. We found out we can sneak out at night and walk underneath the pilings of the boardwalk up to one end where the British shore patrol was stationed. They'd let the GIs go through. So we get into town, 3 of us each night, and met a couple of English girls and had tea and talked. And we did that for a couple of nights, and then the third night we crossed the channel. This was after D-Day, and maybe around the end of August. And as we neared the beaches in Normandy, I saw hundreds of ships. I mean, I'd say hundreds, but I mean one after the other, end to end, all sunk and blown up and whatever. And I realized I'm getting into a war zone, you know, this is really something. And the hard part was the ship stopped offshore and they threw over cargo nets. And we had, with a barracks bag and all, climbed down the cargo nets onto, they had some Higgins boats come in, landing craft, and kind of fall into those things. Some of the guys even didn't make it between the bobbing boats, and they go straight down with that weight. They went down like an anchor. There was no chance of rescuing anybody that fell between the ship and the Higgins boats. But the one I was on was called Death Trap, and he said, the Coast Guardsman, I think was a pilot, he was telling us about it, and he said that this was Omaha Beach, and when he got to the beach he couldn't drop the ramp, and so he backed off and tried again, and the ramp wouldn't drop down. And after the third time he said, fellas, I can't drop the ramp, you're going to have to climb over the edge. So we had all this gear climbing over into waist deep water, and everything was in disrepair. I mean, that you can see that there was one big battle that happened, and I thought of what it must have been like, you know, to see all this stuff. And we climbed up on a little trail up on a hill, and I think it might be Point de Hoc, where the Rangers landed. So we had a couple of hundred GIs. We didn't have anyone over a PFC. We didn't have any non-coms. We didn't have any officers. We didn't know who we were, where we were, or what we were going to do. And we moved in offshore and set up some tents. We had no food. Nobody even knew who we, you know, coming around with food or anything. And some of the guys came back with huge tins of bacon and peaches, and where did you find those? And they told us, you know, down and back and about a mile from here. Well, we went down, we found this huge cache of food. And we were grabbing whatever we can to bring back to our little area, when a Jeep pulled up with an officer brandishing a six-shooter. And he said, you guys take all that stuff back. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the German prisoners of war. As a prisoner of war food dump. None of it went back. It all went into the tent. We cooked bacon and our mess kits and all that. So we were supposed to join the 2nd Division. And I thought, gee, that's great. I loved the 2nd Division's patch because it had a Indian head and a star, and I said, boy, that's great. So we were in France, I guess it must have been almost a month, waiting for assignment, and finally they said, you're going to turn in your rifles and bayonets. And the rumor went, it was unbelievable. To fly to Italy, we were going to build landing strips for the Air Corps. Well, that was some great deal if that was going to be true, but it seemed unbelievable. So, one thing led to another. Sure enough, we turned in our rifles and bayonets. We're taken by truck to a kind of a makeshift airfield. I think it was out of St. Mary Inglese area. And they had a bunch of C-47s, and I understood it to be some of the 82nd Airborne planes they brought in from Scotland. And they were going to actually fly us to Italy. So we got in 18 men to a plane, and we took off. We had no formation. Planes, whenever they were filled up, they would just fly. And I thought this was great. I mean, but we were flying so low that looking out, he raised a wing for a church steeple to go by. And treetop level all through France. I saw an apple farmer with a cart with apples or whatever, and the horse or donkey reared up, only momentarily, and the apples were spilling out, and he was shaking his fist at us. And we kept flying and flying and flying, and all of a sudden, we had a pilot, co-pilot, and a radar navigator man. And the radar navigator fella come out and said, "Well, fellas, the radar's not working, and we're lost. We don't know where we are." So we were flying along, and all of a sudden they saw this one landing strip. At one end was like a pillbox, and the other end was looked like a cracked up German bomber. It was a little short thing, but they said, "We got to land because we're supposed to get to Lyon for gas, and we have to know just where we are." So somehow we landed, and we all jumped out. We saw about 30 people coming towards us. We didn't know if they were Germans or, we didn't have any rifles, didn't have any bayonets, and I just had a pocket knife. So, but they happened to be French. But when we got out, we noticed on the bottom of our aircraft, we have a plastic dome which houses radar instruments. And there was a tree branch, actually about a 8-foot tree branch stuck into it, right through it. And that's what made us get lost. We pulled the branch out, and with gestures between the people and the pilot pointing this and that way, and we had a map, and they showed us which way to Lyon, which we then, to get out of this little tiny strip, the radar guy, which I'll call crew chief, told all of us, 18 of us, to get right up against the door of the cockpit, put all our weight up in the front end. And the pilot was at one end by the pillbox, and he revved up the engines, full, and then with the brakes on, then released it, and we shot off, and we were like catapulted out of that little spot. And we got to Lyon, some airfield there. There was French resistance with gas, and the captain said of the plane said to be back by 6 in the morning, wherever you go, be back by 6 for takeoff. So we had French money. We had some invasion money and regular French money, and somehow the three of us, we found a bus, took us into Lyon. No one could speak French, but little smiles and whatever. And they didn't know who we were, actually. I don't even know if they saw American soldiers before, but we got into Lyon, and we were walking down the street. There were 3 girls in front of us in green coveralls. You know, GIs would do, they stop whistling, we stop whistling and making some noise. I guess, and speaking English, and I guess one Frenchman come over to us and said, and he said it in English, he said, you fellas cut that out. Those girls are free French at the interior, and they just as soon shoot you as look at you, so don't make any more noise. So we ended up in a little arcade and at the bar and had a glass of wine, and they wanted to hang out and I wanted to go back to the plane. And I bought a bottle of wine and I bought a knife with a corkscrew on it. And somehow found my way back to the plane. I sat under the wing and I tried some of the wine and didn't like it. And, you know, what is it? 19-year-old kid doesn't really have much taste for wine, so I poured it out. And in the morning we all were there and we took off for Italy. And then we had to fly over the Alps. And it was cold. And the radar fellow came out and said, you know, at that one point he said, you know, if our wheels were down, we would have left imprints on that mountaintop because we barely got over this one peak. And I don't know how we got to where we were going without flying over German territory. Maybe out over to the western part of Italy or so. But we came into a homemade field below Florence, Italy. And we were wondering, well, maybe we're going to build airstrips here, you know, because it didn't look like a real good airfield. Trucks pulled up, and we noticed a pine tree on the door. It said 91st Replacement Depot. So we were put in trucks and taken to the 91st Replacement Depot, and before they would feed us, they gave us rifles and bayonets, and we had to go out on the range and zero in the rifle, and we had chow. So we weren't going to build airstrips. We were in an infantry division. And a few days at the replacement depot, I was shipped over to the 361st Infantry. And from there, I was sent up to the front lines. Actually, it was the town of LaGuardia. It's about 8 miles behind the defensive positions. And I walked into this little old building, and there were 4 guys sitting on the floor around a candle and smoking cigarettes. And as I walked in, they looked up and said, hey, you're nice and tall. You're a first scout. Okay. Then he said, well, what's your name? And I told him. He said, well, welcome aboard. So the company was really low and needed replacements. K Company was a few weeks before was completely wiped out by the Germans at a trap in Livignano, and the company was never reformed. And so here I was, assigned as a first scout in the combat outfit 8 miles behind the lines. And what we were doing now, it was winter time, not winter yet, but it was beginning of winter in October. They couldn't move tanks too readily in the base of the Appenines Mountains where we were, and so they dug in defensive positions all along the front. We would go up into these positions for 8 to 12 days at a time in 2-man foxholes. You were under artillery fire mortar fire and machine gun fire all the time. And you can count the mortars as they come in closer. You'd figure the next one was going to drop in on you. And you go up and for that amount of time and come back for about a week and go back up again. And you did that for almost 5 months.
Now, were you given winter gear? Did you have?
We had mountain coats. Well, they were parkas actually. One side was gray, the other side was white with the snow. I don't even remember getting gloves or heavy socks. But
what kind of footwear did you have? You just had the.
Well, we had, for the most part, we had leggings and regular.
Combat boots?
We didn't get combat boots yet.
You still had shoes then?
Still in shoes. As the winter progressed, we did get, I recall, some maybe heavier boots. But it didn't, we had orders not to take our boots off when we're on line because the Germans may start something and you have to be ready to go. But at one point, my right foot was starting to ache so much that I did take my boot off or a shoe, my couple of pair of socks I had on, and I noticed I was getting frostbite. So I massaged my foot. My ear was frostbitten. My hands were starting to get frostbite. My other foot was getting a frostbite too. And I had a scarf my sister knitted me. It was a wool scarf, and I wrapped my foot in that for a while. And you just don't think about it. I mean, you don't say anything. You don't say to the. We only had one medic, and I don't know where he was most of the time, but he didn't come up online with us actually. So you just forgot about it. That was one of the things you lived with. And but we had a lot of experiences on that time in the foxhole. So I paired up with one buddy from Needham, Massachusetts, David Hutton. We tried to always be together because we talked about our plans that we were going to do in the future if we got out. And he was just a nice guy. He'd watch my back and I'd watch his back. And when you go up on line and you get relieved, you try to make yourself as light as possible. And you always have we always have 4 grenades with us on our harness. And a lot of the guys would just take them off and leave them at the edge of the hole, and rockets, whatever they had, to make it lighter for the 8-mile hike back. And one night, a lot of mortar fire, maybe for about 30 minutes. The Germans put down a heavy mortar barrage, and all of a sudden I heard a lot of commands in German. They were coming in on an attack, and some flares went up, and the hole was, it's a 2-man foxhole, and one was up on top and the other was in undercover. I was on top, and when I heard these Germans, and they were sounded like they were 20 yards away from me, over a little rise, I started throwing hand grenades at them and cursing at them, and I threw about 6 to 8 hand grenades, and I didn't want them near me. I found out later they captured 2 of our guys, only about 2 holes away from me, and took them prisoners. I don't ever know, didn't know whatever happened to them, but it could have been a lot worse. And another interesting occasion was on New Year's Eve. American lines were lit up with searchlights all along the front. And I would say 50 to 100 searchlights shining in the sky, crisscrossing sometimes for artillery. But on New Year's Eve, all shelling stopped. The Germans didn't fire, the Italians didn't fire, the Americans didn't fire, or the Italians too, because we had some problems with the fascists, but the Germans turned all their machine guns up in the air, and they fired all the tracers. And they started building bonfires, and we could see the fires. They were singing and drinking. And we got out of our foxholes and we went around wishing everybody Happy New Year. Maybe the war is over, maybe it's so quiet, you can actually walk around. And Dave and I had a piece of the ration, cheese ration, and water, ice water. And we said, we'll do this symbolically every New Year's Eve. We'll have a little piece of cheese and water in remembrance of this night. Well, the Germans were really having a good time. You can actually see them because we're on one mountain and a little valley, and they're on the other. And but by dawn, the shells started going again, and the war started all over again. So it was interesting that, and you realize we're all human beings. And we did get one break went on past to Florence for a day. And one other time, the company went to Montecatini, a rest area, for a week. But the snow started to melt, and that's starting to think of an offensive. We were originally going to start a winter offensive, but it was just at the Battle of the Bulge, and they called it off because they didn't know what was going to happen if the Germans were going to push on the Italian front. So they held up on that. So it would have been like a suicide attempt, from what we know now, for us to make any kind of winter offensive. But time came that we're getting ready for the spring offensive. And there was one mountain in front of us that we could see all the time, Mount Adoni, which is one of the highest peaks in the Apennine Mountains. And we knew the Germans were in there for 3-4 years in caves and observed us all the time. And but that was our company's objective, and time came that we were going to jump off at midnight. They had aerial bombardment during the day and then heavy artillery at night using phosphorus shells and everything else. So, we had a man befriended by our colonel called Frenchy LaRue. He was a deported Italian mobster. And he and our colonel turned out to be good friends, and Frenchy LaRue knew some of the minefields. He'd wander about. I don't know how he did it, but when we jumped off, I was supposed to follow him, and going across the open field, first thing I did was fall over a dead cow, then got up and didn't know where actually we were going except towards the mountain, and flares were going up, and when the flare came in, I hit the ground and my side of my face hit a boot, and a fellow in front of me, which was Frenchy LaRue. And in the flare, I looked up And under his arm, he was carrying the American flag. And in the light of the flare, I saw the red and white stripes. And a sense of peace came over me. I said, you know, we're going to do good. We're going to make it. And then we moved out again, up the mountain. We had orders to fix bayonets. And that's an order you really don't want to hear, but you fix bayonets and you don't know. I said I'd rather shoot someone before I stab anyone. Going up the mountain, they're shooting machine gun fire at us. Can't see where they're shooting from because they're in caves above us. And we at a point where it started to get light, they yelled, dig in. Luckily the ground was still soft, and I took out my shovel and started digging a slit trench, and I got most of me all undercover, all of it that felt protected, but someone was shooting the grass just above me. I can hear the bullets hitting. So I took out my mess kit spoon, which I carried in my pocket, and kept digging a little deeper hole for my head to get underground. If I could get my head under cover, I'd be safe. But it was all day long, the wounded were crying for their mother, moaning. Medics could not get them. They were being shot. Anyone that made a move was being killed because it was like a shooting gallery for them. And by evening, the crying stopped. They probably died by then. And a fella dug in next to me. I heard a thump and a moan and all during the day, and I was wondering what was going on. And when it was dark enough, I crawled over and I found out he was trying to break his hand using his bayonet wrapped in his handkerchief to handle the bayonet and slamming his bayonet against his hand up against his rifle. And well, that kind of shook me up, and didn't say anything, and then orders to move out again, moving up, and go as far as we can, and I got into one shell hole, and I saw a guy, and I asked him where a G Company was, and you know where, and I found out he was dead. So I didn't want to stay in that position, and then I saw a bouncing Betty anti-personnel mine in front of me, and I didn't have no way of marking it or to let someone else know. It was being in a hole, and it was silhouetted up against the skyline. I think I put this fellow's helmet over it, and I got out of there. We was originally supposed to jump off at midnight and secure the mountain by dawn. Now this was going into the second night. The third night, in the slit trench that I was blown out of the slit trench and knocked unconscious. I don't know how long, but it felt like somebody kicking you in the stomach. And
What was it that landed there? A mortar shell, or?
I don't know. It might have even been one of our own artillery shells. I don't know. It was some artillery of some kind, but you just don't feel, you feel for blood and all that kind of stuff, and you have no one around you to say, how do I look or what, but you just keep moving up. And well, after about 60 hours, and I didn't even fire a rifle. There's no one to see to shoot at, and I'm loaded with 2 bandoliers, 4 grenades, and a cartridge belt. And finally got up to the top of the mountain, and it was daybreak. I got into another shell hole, and there was a sergeant of mine in there, and I said, "Gee, where's everybody?" He said, "A lot of them were killed and wounded." And as I was looking over, being on top of the mountain, there was an array of trenches and camouflage netting, and of course it was pockmarked with shell holes and everything else. But I saw some movement in one of the trenches. Something caught my eye, and I don't know. I haven't slept, you haven't had anything to eat or drink. I don't even know going to the bathroom in 3 days and nights. And I was probably, I don't know, more tired than anything, but I jumped up, ran with my rifle, and over towards that trench. I could speak German, certain words, because my grandmother was German. And I told him to come out, come and see here, and mach schnell, come out fast. Not knowing if anything would happen, but in the trench there was a curtain over where it goes underground, and it parted, and a German soldier came out with his hands up. There's a ladder, and he comes up out of it. And I took 11 prisoners, one after the other, out of that position. And there was some small arms fire going around. I didn't care if they were shooting at me or anybody, but I brought them back up and around the bend so the captain asked me if I could interrogate him. I said, no, I only want words I know are cuss words, and come out fast in German. And, but I thought, I know they were from an Alpine division. I think it was like the 5th Alpine division, but I could not confirm it. And so I gave them cigarettes. I kind of felt sorry for them. One was wounded, and they all took cigarettes, and I held a match, and they lit up the cigarettes. And one had a metal insignia on his cap, and I took my rifle and bayonet and I raised it up to the side of his face and took his cap off and cut this insignia off, which was an edelweiss, which is a mountain flower. It was my first war trophy. And on the other one, another soldier, he had the war mark patch over his shirt or blouse, and I took my bayonet, took that off him too. I guess they wondered what I was going to do next, but I don't remember too much after that, except I thought we were going to have a rest. And boy, we were really tired. And one kid came over to me and grabbed me and hugged me and said, "They told me you were killed, and I'm so glad to see you," because we were scattered about. And some guys put up the American flag on the mountain that Frenchy LaRue brought. I could see that from a distance that they were putting that up. So figuring we were going to take a break, I opened up a can of rations and decided I'm going to eat. When the sergeant came by and said, "Okay guys, saddle up, we're moving out. We got the next mountain to take." But I'm going to take a break. Now I'm going to go. Scouts out. So they told me that there was look at that one German on the trail ahead of me and keep an eye on him because he's moving, but he's been wounded. And I was about 30, 40 yards ahead of the company, walking along. The other scout, I had, the second scout was on my left flank. And as I approached the bend towards this wounded German, 2 Germans jumped out of a machine gun nest. I could see the barrel when they jumped up, tip over, and they were all camouflaged with sticks and twigs on their helmet and all, yelling, "Comrade, comrade, Jante Tedeschi," Polish. They're saying they're not German, they're Polish. They looked about 15 years old. So I yelled over to the other scout. I said, "Hey, I got 2 Jerrys coming down the trail, don't shoot them." And I just told him to go in the direction of the company coming up. I don't know what happened to them or whatever, but I reached the end of this mountaintop, and there was a valley below, and it looked like a John Wayne movie. I mean, there were tanks moving, Germans, trucks, our aircraft strafing, everybody shooting everybody, and I'm watching this whole panorama of war. So, I've been through all of this, I haven't fired my rifle. I said, by God, I'm going to fire this thing, I'm going to fire down there. I took an aim, pulled the trigger, and nothing happened. I ejected the shell, next one, click, nothing. Again, nothing. I ejected the clip, put in another clip, nothing happened. I realized something was wrong, and the first thing you do is look for dirt in the chamber, and I field stripped the rifle. As the company was finally coming up to me, on making a line, I found a little, I think it was some dirt in the chamber, and I got the rifle operating, so I banged off about 4 clips down in the valley. I realized I took 11 Germans with this gun, a rifle, I shouldn't call it a gun, and 2 more that surrendered right in front of me, which they could have possibly shot me. And I had a rifle that didn't work. I could have used a broom and captured all these things, you know. And it's kind of amusing in a way, but kind of scary in another way too, because I may have lost my life because of that. When the company formed up on my line on the mountaintop, the captain or possibly lieutenant said, okay, Inglese, go down on the side here in the field, see what you can see, go down, we got to get off this mountaintop. So I started walking across the field, down the plowed field a little bit, and I got maybe about 50 yards when machine gun fire started shooting at me. I just turned around and zigzagged back to the company, and the guys were laughing because of the way I was running all over the place. And so the captain and lieutenant said, well, we can't go down that way. Anyway, try on the right flank, go down on the side. So I went down that side and got fired at again, and I said, okay, let's back up, dig in, and spend the night up on the top. And I dug in with some kid, I don't know who he was in the company, but we were really, really tired. And I said I'd take first watch for a while in the 2-man hole. We don't carry watches, so I thought it was like forever I was awake, and I said, I gotta sleep. So I woke him up and told him to stand guard, and I got under my raincoat and lit up a cigarette and smoked it, put it out, and I just went to sleep. Before I know it, he was shaking me and said, it's time to go on duty again. Boy, that was quick. So I again stayed awake as long as I could, and I woke him up, and got under the raincoat, lit up a cigarette, and I was still smoking it when he shook me and said, it's time for you. I said, how could it be time? I didn't even smoke the cigarette. I said, if you wake me up again, I'm going to kill you. So the next thing I knew, the sergeant woke both of us up in the morning. Time to saddle up and move on. But we had firefights in towns, and under heavy fire crossing the Po River, we used alligators to cross them. And a lot of time we come into a town, and me being a scout walking in first, I'd get all the wine that people would come out with, the bottles of wine and bread and eggs, and the eggs would fit in the bandoliers, where the empty spots. And I would carry these raw eggs and be careful of hitting the ground in a hurry because I wouldn't want to break anything. But mostly towns were without too much problems, but some of it, when we get into the square, they'd have a couple of SS guys in the bell tower with machine guns, and they'd wait for us to get in the square, then open up. And And I remember Dave and I were shooting at the bell, trying to see how many times we could ring the bell. We figured it would either drive the guy crazy up there. But if you got working your way to the bell tower, it was the center part of the tower. When you get in the door, was open. The stairs were on the perimeter, inside perimeter. So with our armor-piercing bullets, you can just shoot the floor up, and they won't be shooting anymore because. But and there are other times when we got to I stopped on the edge of a little valley, and there was a house down below. And the lieutenant said for me to go down and check it out with a radio operator. So I walked down, and as I approached the house, I told the radio operator, watch out, there's a lot of tile off the roof to shoot mines. I mean, he probably knew too, but I noticed the tripwire across the door. And I said, tell him back there that there's a tripwire, the house is mine. I called in German, nobody came out. If they did, they would have shot me, but I don't know. It seems unreal now when I think about it, but the lieutenant said, okay, come on back, and he's walking to my left along the edge of the hill, and another platoon was coming down towards the house when machine gun fire opened up, and they shot, wounded or killed 7 of the other platoon coming towards the house. And pinned this other fellow and I down. I got into a little ditch, and they were hitting about 8 to 10 inches in front of me, machine gun bullets. I watched them because I couldn't put my face down. The sweat would roll into my eyes. And I watched the bullets hit the ground, like somebody spitting into the ground in front of me. And I really thought that I wasn't going to make it this time. And a short time later, I guess weapons company set up some mortar. And what seemed like hours, maybe a couple of hours, that we were pinned down. I said, we got to get up and get out of here and run up to the side of the hill to where the platoon was. And we got up there, and the firing stopped. And when I got up there, I saw my lieutenant. He was in my position, taking the platoon around. He was shot in the face and in the hand. He was laying there. The medic was attending him. And I knew he was going to come back to the company. And he was a great guy. He was like Dan Daly. I mean, he was in defense position. He'd say, I don't have anything exciting to write home about. Let's go out on patrol. He'd carry a submachine gun, and off we'd go. But he was also going to, at one time, put me in for a Silver Star. And I knew this one was going to come about. And I mean, I didn't even think about it then, but we didn't have a platoon leader. We figured maybe one of the sergeants would get a battlefield commission. But now we got a supply sergeant from another company as our new platoon leader. It didn't set well with me because every bend in the road he'd say, okay, scout, check this out, or do this, do that, and I'd go out and turn around and say, okay, Lieutenant, you can come now, it's okay. And coming into one town, it was just getting real dark, and it was a long, high wall at a park, and at the entrance, when I got up to the entrance, I stopped, and there was a lot of gunfire and a lot of Germans shouting in there, and traces and whatever. And the lieutenant said, okay, go in there and check it out. I said, I'm not going in there. And he said again, I'm telling you, go in there and check out what's going on. I said, I'm not going to go in there. And he grabbed me by the collar and threw me around the wall. He said, get in there. I walked back, and I said to him, in the meantime, the guys in the platoon made a circle around him. I said, I'll go if you come with me. And then he backed off.
All right, we're going to stop right here. I got to change tapes.
Oh. The lieutenant, I don't know if he had much combat experience that we had being a supply sergeant, but it was kind of nerve-wracking to me that he wanted me to check out every little thing. I was so used to the great lieutenant we had before. And when he didn't come in with me to the park, and he said, okay, I remember, moving down, we took another house. It looked like a resort house, actually, when I think about it the next day, but we walked in the door, and as we entered, there was a German officer, a fascist officer, and the owner of this inn, with a glass of wine raising a toast, either to us as we walked in, I don't know how it came about, but we took over the house, and one of the fellows from New York that carried a Tommy gun, we got a hold of one of the fellows that worked in this resort, and said we want to go to the wine cellar. And he took us down, and boy, hundreds of bottles of wine in this wine cellar. I took, I think, 7 bottles of wine in my pack and hands, and came upstairs, and he had something. And we went up to a room, and it was a chaise lounge, and I took the scarf off the bureau, and I said, that's my blanket, this is my bed, this is my wine. And just laying down there, and the lieutenant comes in, said, take all the wine back, don't put your dirty boots on a lounge chair, and don't use a scarf for a blanket. So when he left, all the wine bottles went into our packs. And I was just trying to get a little bit of rest when they said, you're on guard duty downstairs. So I went down, and they gave me a bazooka loaded with a rocket in it, ready to go, and said, if a tank comes down that street, shoot it. And while I was waiting, standing there, I noticed guys running out of the building into a barn, coming back with a bicycle and putting it in the bushes and running back in the house. Well, no tank came down the road, and at daybreak, just about the whole company was on bicycles. We were in support then, we weren't the attack. And for about a mile or so, we rode bicycles and had a good time riding around, and until the captain said, no bikes. And we started to go back in formation again, go down the road. And being in support, we didn't have to be on high alert or anything, so we were told at one time to hold up, and some of us walked over to a farmhouse and knocked on the door to see if they had anything, bread or anything. And the woman opened the door and looked at us and slammed it shut again. So we figured, well, they don't like us. So I moved it on over to the side, and there was a stockade fence type fence, and I looked over and there was a building. I saw Germans coming out of the building, getting into trucks, and one was on crutches, he was bandaged in crutches, and it probably was a field hospital. And I actually had my rifle up and was throwing a bead on him, and one of my buddies nudged me and said, nah, let him go. So, I don't know if I would have fired or not, but we just watched them all evacuate the building. So we went back to the little farmhouse again and knocked on the door, and this one kid said, we're Americans. He spoke in Italian. She thought we were Germans. She said, from what he interpreted, that the Germans were sleeping in our house that very morning. And she didn't know the Americans were coming that close. And once she found out we were Americans, she got out bread and some jelly and offered us some wine, but we said, no, we had enough wine, we'd offer you some wine. But it was very interesting. And, to have people think we were German soldiers. But there are many other towns that we had a lot of problems with, and at one point in the Po Valley, we were asked to ride tanks. They brought up some tanks, and they said, get on, we'll give you a lift, and you don't have to walk so much. And we were on the lead tank when coming into this one small hamlet when machine gun fire opened up on the tank, and they were shooting real low to the ground, too. If we jumped off, we would jump right into it. The tank driver was smart enough to go over to the side of the road, which is a ditch, and the tank tilted a little bit, and we all fell into the ditch. And he drove over to this building and stuck his barrel into the window and blew out the back of the building. And a lot more small arms fire and all, but we didn't ride tanks after that. And there was another time, too, coming in to the back end of the town, along the backs of these houses. We were walking along, and I was told to hold up because I was out in an open field, and our new lieutenant had a clicker. He would click or whistle for me, and I'd come back, and the lieutenant said, let the radio operator know we're coming across this field for any companies that are in this area. And I said, well, thanks a lot. I was already out in the field. The other scout and I, we came back, and I went back down the line to the radio operator, and I said, let any company know, whatever company in our area, that we're coming across this particular field. And he, as he was trying to get a message out, he looked across. We were all in a crouched position. He said, looks like we're going to have a fight on our hands. I said, what do you mean? He said, look. And I looked. There was about 50 to 100 Germans, which I thought were Germans, coming across in a skirmish line towards us. Somebody on the end, a sergeant, so yelled, halt, which I think is customary procedure before you shoot them. And they started to hit the ground and open up fire, and so we fired back. And we had a firefight for about 20-25 minutes, and I kept firing real low. I think I'll try to shoot him in the ankle or something, whatever. And then we were told to dig in right then and there. The ground was soft. It was easy to dig a hole. The course of the evening, I heard this loud explosion. I looked across the field, and I saw a rooftop intact raise up on the ground with a ball of fire, and then go into a million pieces, explode. It was like in slow motion. And then I heard some tanks rolling out of the area, which were German tanks. And so we dug in for the night, and my buddy Dave had carried a Coleman stove with him. He came over to my slit trench and said, hey, give me some water in your canteen cup. I'm going to make you coffee. He's always taken good care of me, and he made me a hot cup of coffee in the morning later, and he said, how'd you like the coffee? I said, it was Nescafe. I said, it was the best I've ever had. He said, well, you know, when that one shell came in close, he said, my hand hit the side of the hole, and he said, a lot of dirt fell in, but he said, I mixed it all up anyway. He said, you probably couldn't taste the difference. But, and he was the guy with the stove. We would be walking along, and he'd ask for a couple of my eggs, and he'd hard boil them, holding the Coleman stove and the canteen cup with water and hard boil the eggs for me. But there were a lot of things I don't remember. But there were a lot of good times too. I mean, I always tried to make light of what was going on, or make some kind of a joke when we're in the defense positions. A mortar shell hit just on the edge of our hole, and a flame shot across it. And I said to Dave, gee, if I had a cigarette, I could have held it up and had a cigarette, built-in cigarette lighter. And another time, when Dave was up on a hole, he yelled, I'm hit, and I grabbed him and pulled him down. He started laughing, and a piece of shrapnel hit his helmet and put a big dent in it, but it broke the webbing of his helmet liner and pushed his helmet down over his eyes. I mean, it looked like something on a sad sack, but he was proud of that helmet, and he wouldn't part with it. He liked that. But I lost a lot of good buddies, and I did a lot of praying, and I kind of knew I was going to make it. I had a feeling, after being so close to death so many times, that I knew I was actually going to come out ahead. And crossing the Po River, and it was, I know it was raining that day too, because trying to not step on the butterfly bombs that our aircraft dropped, or anti-personnel mines along the shoreline. Between that and dodging bullets, and I got into a high grass area, and then into an area that had a gazebo. And by that time I threw away my raincoat, I threw away everything to make my pack lighter, except for the wine bottles. And I laid on the floor of that gazebo and I said, this is it, I quit. This is the end for me. I'm not gonna fight anymore. I've had it. And for about 15 minutes, I was free of war. And I heard the sergeant calling me, and after the second or third time, I'm here. I went back into the war again. But I had a good outfit. The 91st Division was a great division. The 361st Infantry, we received the Presidential Unit Citation, and you can count on all the guys. The kid that tried to break his hand, he broke something, and he let it swell up a bit, and he got shipped out, Purple Heart, and I never mentioned it to anybody except for this first time something like this happened. And we went on to almost to the Yugoslavic border when the war came about. We were in the farmyard washing up, and they said the war was over.
What was the reaction?
Oh, wow, we couldn't believe it. I couldn't, there was a hint of the war for about a week or two before, that the war was coming to an end. And, but you couldn't let your guard down, because, you didn't want to get hit. You didn't want to have any problems. So when the war was finally over, we were all hugging each other and shouting. But then, for the next 3 days, we had the detail of rounding up, riding trucks to strong points where the Germans didn't give up. They were still holed up and shooting. And no one wanted to get shot now or get killed. And I don't remember, most of us always took a backward step, we didn't want to volunteer for anything. But we did finally end up in the town of Gorizia. And it was on the border of Yugoslavia and Italy. During World War I, but prior to that, Gorizia was Yugoslavic territory, and after World War I, in the treaty, they gave it to Italy. So things were not peaceful as we thought they would be. Marshal Tito and his communistic band of men would ride at night, take the people, Italian people, out of the houses and have Yugoslavic people move in. We never knew what was happening to the Italian people, if they were killing them or whatever. But we had orders that we were going to stop this. And I guess that's why we had a battalion of troops in this town. In order to go on pass in town, you had to wear your cartridge belt with ammo in it and carry your rifle. And you can imagine going to a bar with a rifle slung over your shoulder or leaning up against a bar and having a drink. It was like Wild West days. You expected somebody with a six-shooter and everything else, but we really had to keep close watch of Tito's men. I volunteered to ride on a Jeep to check on roadblocks. The Jeep had a water-cooled 30 caliber gun mounted in the back, and I thought that was pretty neat to stand behind that thing. But didn't have to use it, and they kind of slowed up a little bit of taking these people out of the homes. But it reached a point where one day we got orders, combat packs, combat rations. They gave us grenades and a couple more bandoliers. And we were in this one building until 6 a.m. in the morning when he said, okay, it's all called off. He lured us off. And we didn't know what that was all about. But eventually, we were all anxious to go home, and we occupied Gorizia for, I imagine, three and a half months. And we were sent down to an area outside of Naples to come home. We got American money, and we were really excited, but we had one drawback because the 361st was supposed to reorganize after going home to go to Japan to fight in the Pacific. So they kind of gave us a physical outside of Naples and said, yeah, you're combat ready. So we went down into Naples and got on board a Liberty ship, or it's a Victory ship actually. And when I got on board, I looked up on a bridge and a fellow looked familiar to me. And I asked one of the crewmen if this guy's name was his name, Herb. He said, yeah. I said, gee, he looks familiar. Can you tell him? I gave him my name and see if it rings a bell. And a short time later, he came down. He was a second mate in the Merchant Marine. He was a kid in my class in high school. I was so surprised to see him, and he was surprised to see me, and he said, you know, I'll share my bunk with you with a radio operator, but if you want to stay up here. I said, no, I'm going to be with the guys. But I couldn't, when I looked at the 6-tier hammocks in the hold of that ship, I found a spot on a stern that was about 5 feet high, or 5 feet by 5 feet square metal stanchion, and I said, this is my spot. I tied my barracks bag up on there, and I spent 13 days and nights up on that one spot on the way home. And coming home, on a loudspeaker, our colonel said, that incident we had with Tito, and you had combat packs, he said, we were going to engage him in combat. You were going to fight your way to an airfield. You were going to be evacuated by air transport command planes. And he said, Tito got a cable from Stalin and said if you have any problems with the Americans, they will back them up 100%. They'll back up Tito. And he said that's almost the start of World War III right then and there. And a couple of days later, they announced that they dropped an atomic bomb in Japan. And we didn't know what an atomic bomb was or what it could do. And then they dropped another one a couple of days later. And we didn't realize what kind of destruction would happen. But they said the war in Japan was over before we even got home. We're still on board the ship. And that made us even feel better. Wow, we're not going to have to go back into combat again. The entire war is over. We got into Newport News, Virginia. They had a three-piece band on a pier playing for us as we got off. And I think we were at Camp Patrick Henry for a day or so, and we shipped home for furlough, and a bunch of us on a train riding towards New York. When another train passed us, it sounded like a shell coming in, and the next thing you know, we were all laying on the floor of the train. We did it in unison, and we all started laughing and brushing our khakis. And I got home and had a wonderful, wonderful furlough. And after 30 days, I went report back to camp, not back, but report to Camp Rucker, Alabama. And I was back there after the second day. I started to get the pains again that I had in my stomach from the shell problem in Italy, and they got more severe this time, and I all of a sudden couldn't keep anything in my stomach, and a couple of guys put me in a jeep and took me to the base hospital. I was there for 30 days. With 6 days I had the intravenous, I guess the glucose or whatever, because I couldn't keep any food in me, and I was strapped and taped to the bed. And I asked them what's wrong. Nobody would say anything, and next thing I knew, they had an ambulance take me to Fort Benning Hospital in Georgia. And I thought, gee, it must be something serious. I was at the regional hospital at Fort Benning, and I'd probably been there almost over 3 months. All kinds of tests, they shoving things in my nose, down into my stomach, and area the opening. I really didn't have too much pain. I was feeling good, and I really wanted to get out. And I said to the major one morning, I said, I got to get out of here. I stopped experimenting on me. He got awfully mad and said, we don't experiment. I said, whatever you're doing, you're killing me. But I said, what is wrong with me? And all I can get out of him, or somebody, was that possibly it's something to do with the concussion. It did something to my stomach, or whatever. And I was even offered a Purple Heart, and I said no. And I just wanted to get out of the hospital. And finally, I got out, and it was in January. My mother thought I'd be home for Christmas. It is like the third Christmas I haven't been home. And she was really expecting me. I'm coming back in September. I'll be home shortly. But I had to go from the hospital back to Camp Rucker, Alabama. There was, of course, the whole division was deactivated by then. All the guys were long gone. Nobody knew what happened to me. And I was sent over to some deserted white barrack for the first night, and it was so cold and no blankets. I slept in my overcoat, and I used another mattress over me as a blanket. And in the morning I got into some company that was a brand new bunch of recruits going through basic training. And first sergeant said, take a bunk upstairs and just wait until you get your papers. You don't have anything to do, and just relax. And I took a bed up in the corner upstairs and just laid in bed, and all recruits come back and go out to dinner and the whole thing. And the next morning for reveille, I'd still be in bed, and they'd look over at me and wonder, what kind of a gold bricker am I, you know? I'd get up leisurely and go down and have breakfast with the first sergeant or whatever. And after the guys are out training, and that evening I got dressed up and put on my blouse and the ribbons and my PFC patch. And the guys took a look at it. Wow, they didn't know who they realized who I was. And the first sergeant said, if you want a detail, would you like to drive a Jeep and pick up 2 German prisoners and take them over to the colonel's house for house cleaning and then pick them up in the afternoon? I said, sure. He said, you can keep the Jeep too. So I picked up a Jeep at the motor pool, and I think the first day I drove about 400 miles around the camp, but I'd pick up 2 Germans every morning, different ones, and I'd always try to say my best, if they were captured in Italy, were they on Monadoni or whatever, but they'd always say 9. But I tried. And so I finally got my orders to report to Fort Meade, Maryland, for processing to be discharged. And when I was there, they going through some more additional information. They asked me if I wanted to re-enlist, get in the Signal Corps, and you can be a photographer, and you can become a sergeant, and make you a staff sergeant, you know, great, more money, and 3 years, you know, you learn a good trade. See, that sounded good, so I called my folks up and I said, you know, I'm about ready to be discharged in a day or so, but they offered me this, if I re-enlist. I guess my mother wasn't too keen about that, but anyway, I didn't do it, of course. And I want to mention too, while I was in Italy, before we shipped out to Naples in this one area, the captain called me in and asked me if I wanted to go to West Point. And I said, West Point? He said, yeah. He said, we're looking for 19, 20, 20-year-old, 21-year-old combat experience soldiers with an academic background or whatever. You automatically can go to West Point. And I said, I don't think so. I'll take my chances of going to the Pacific, fighting there, but I don't want to make the Army my career. But I felt honored that they asked. But I didn't tell my folks then I wasn't going to re-enlist, and I got discharged and went home. My mother was a little upset because she said, you know, Dad and I drove that next day to Fort Meade looking for you to tell you not to re-enlist. I said, how could you find me? You didn't even know thousands of soldiers. She said, we drove around and asked if they know Warren Inglese. But then after several hours I came back. But she was glad I didn't re-enlist, and I now had a problem. I wasn't paid for about 6 months because of being in hospitals. I had to file all kinds of papers and reports. But the first thing I did when I was discharged, a buddy of mine from high school just got out of the Navy too, and we decided to go camping up in the Adirondacks. And then it was an unlikely thing of living outdoors all the time to go camping right off the bat. But we bought a canoe, and we made it into a sailing canoe, and he knew of this place up at Fish Creek on the Adirondacks, and beautiful sandy beach and pine trees. And so we went up there. You can only stay for a week, but the park manager said, oh, you guys can stay as long as you want. So we stayed a couple of weeks, and we sailed, we fished, and we decided what we wanted to do with our lives. and we both had the GI Bill, of course, and we decided we both still love aviation, to go to the Academy of Aeronautics for aircraft and engine or flight engineering. And it gave us time to reflect and see what we wanted to do, and we both applied to the school, and we both were accepted, and we went to school out in Flushing, Long Island. And after about a year, I got to be school photographer. Gee, I like that idea. I like taking pictures. I always did. I was president of the camera club in high school. So, but I got a strep throat, and I had to miss a term. So I was not in class with my buddy, and we're in different hours, and that meant I had to drive instead of going with him. So I wrote to the VA and told them I really wanted to be a photographer. I like to go to photo school, because I'm a photographer down at the school. And they approved it. I had a school lined up, Germain School of Photography. And they said, okay, they approved it. So I had about 3 months to wait. So in the meantime, I saw an ad in a local paper about hiring men to work with newsboys and on their collections and routes and all that. So I said, well, maybe that's a way of getting into the newspaper business. So I applied for it. And the fellow I spoke to, he said, well, you don't want to get this job. You want to be a photographer. I'll call the chief photographer at the Westchester Publishers and see what happens. And which he did. I made an appointment, went to see him, and his name was Henry Sarno, one of 7 famous photographers of 6 brothers, actually. And he said, hey, kid, yeah, you're a veteran and all. He said, a couple of years, I showed him some pictures. He said, a couple of years we could use you. So he said, but you need a speed graphic, a 4x5 speed graphic camera, not that little toy you got there, you know. So what happens, I got my mustering out pay, $300. The speed graphic was $300. I bought the camera. My mother was a little upset, you know, spending all that money. I said, this little camera's going to be the money-making fool. It's going to really work out. So I took some pictures with it and showed him, made an appointment with Henry again down at the photo bureau, and he said, it's pretty good, kid. In about a year, we could use you. Within 2.5 weeks later, he called and said, hey, kid, you want a job? Just filling in for the summertime. When the photographers go on vacation, you fill in their spots. You know, I didn't know anything about news photography or whatever. So I wrote to the VA and said, no, not yet, but I got the job. One of the brothers, Jerry Sarno, took me out a couple of days before and showed me some techniques and how to use the camera properly. And 1 week I'd go out on the road filling in for a photographer, and the next week I'd be in a darkroom printing the 7 photographers' negatives, which was a lesson in itself because I learned so much looking at their photos and how they did things. And within a couple of months they liked my work and said, we're going to hire you as a staff photographer. So I had to write to the VA against it. I really don't need to go to photo school because now I'm a full-fledged photographer. But I really like to be an aerial photographer, and I need a pilot's license. And they approved my pilot's to go to West Air Flying School at Westchester County Airport, which I did. And I become a private pilot. Of course, you can't shoot and fly at the same time, and also you can't do it for money because you need a commercial license. But I had other friends that were commercial pilots. But I would have to spend my time flying around. I soloed in 4.5 hours. I was really hot to fly, and I used to fly over the house on Saturday when my mother was hanging up the laundry, and I'd do a 720, drop the wing down, and do a couple 720s, and she'd wave, and then all of a sudden double wave me, get away, go home, go away. And I try to find my father fishing out in his boat out on Long Island Sound and spot him. And I had a lot of good experiences flying. But I got interested in parachuting too. And so one thing led to another. Covering a story on parachute jumpers, I had the 20-minute instruction. I jumped out of an airplane too. And
Now, with the GI Bill, did you ever use the 5220 Club?
oh yes, I did. I forgot that. Right, that was the first thing everybody did. But I only used it for about 2 or 3 months. I getting $20 a week.
Did you join any veterans organizations at all?
At the time, when I first get out, I lived in Pelham, in the Rochelle area. I joined the Pelham American Legion, but I didn't find it very interesting because all those guys were World War I guys. I mean, geez, you know, I'm really World War II, you know. So I went to a couple of meetings and I dropped out. I haven't thought about it until years later. Actually, when I retired in 1991, and I want to preface that, all during the time when I was working as a news photographer, I won over 100 AP awards and other awards. I once nominated twice for a Pulitzer Prize, once individually and once in a group. I never talked about war, my experience in World War II. And most of the kids I worked with were younger and reporters. And it never entered my mind too much about it until once I retired. All of a sudden then I started to get the nightmares, the flashbacks. Why I'm trembling now too. All these things started to come back to me, and I was getting nightmares of 3 and 4 nights a week. Having a gun or a rifle that didn't fire, that's all part of having a rifle that didn't work when I took these prisoners. And the irritability and all that was getting more and more pronounced. And my wife, Patricia, the most understanding, wonderful person. We were married in '73, with remarriages for both of us, and she always understood me, and with her love, and really helped me through a lot of things. And I didn't know what was going on with me, why I was starting to shake a lot, why my feet were bothering me, and pain in my right foot, and I could hardly walk sometime, and my ear and hands were bothering me, and my hip was aching so much. And it was one morning I ran into Jerry Donnellan, who was the Rockland County Veterans Counselor and head of the Veterans Department. He had a container of coffee, and I had a container of coffee and a roll, and I said, let me buy you breakfast, and we're talking. And he just looked at me and he said, you know, did anyone ever tell you you have post-traumatic stress disorder? I said, no. And he said, it's obvious. I can see it in you. So he asked me to, I said, well, I'm more concerned with my hip. You know, laying in a foxhole on the wet ground and the sleet, the snow, the frozen canteens. I said, I'm more concerned about my stomach and the pains I still get. I've been to hospitals, I've been x-rayed since then, and in 2 different hospitals. I've been kept there for 3 days each time, and they couldn't find anything wrong. So he set something up at the VA in the Bronx for me to go down for a checkup on stomach and in the psychiatric exam. I had to cancel the last minute because I developed prostate cancer. And through the process, I couldn't have any other commitments but to keep going through the radiation and seed implant. So I let it go, and then Jerry again reinstated me for post-traumatic, and was down at the VA hospital in the Bronx, and went through the hearing test because of the mortar and rockets. I'm almost deaf in my right ear. When I got to see the psychiatrist, I had to wait 3 hours for him. I was watching him standing in the hall talking to his colleagues, and my wife and I were still waiting for 3 hours to see him. And when we sat down, he said, "Okay, tell me what's your problem." I said, "Well," I didn't know what post-traumatic really was or anything really about it. And I started to relate the story about being unescorted and running into a submarine and going across the ocean and landing on Omaha Beach and after D-Day, and the guys, some of them were falling through between the boat and the landing craft. And he said, that was about maybe 8 or 10 minutes, he said, "Hey, can you speed things up? I don't want to be here all day." And with that, I just got up and I said, "You're obviously not a veteran. I don't know. I can't talk to you any longer." And I walked out. So naturally I was denied any compensation or anything. So I just let it go for almost 8 or 9 months, and Jerry said, "No, you got to reopen this," and he reopened it. And I saw another psychiatrist and a woman. Instead of spending 12, 14 minutes with the first guy, and he got upset that I would take too long, I spent over 2.5 hours with her and with my wife. And I received disability ratings on post-traumatic and hearing, and currently working on Frostbite now. But I still have stomach problems. I still have them to this day. And
Do they think maybe that could be related to post-stress too?
yeah,
Or?
well, my psychiatrists and psychologists both think it could be related to post-traumatic. They both made that statement, which I submitted, and but it's just something that you have almost on a daily basis. You get that pain in your stomach, and you worry about having cancer, or it might be, but this was going on ever since 1946, 44 and 45, actually. 1945 is when I got hit on the mountain, but I find that the VA in New City, people are very caring, very helpful in all your needs, and I've been to, of course, down in the Bronx. They're very good down there, and also at Montrose Hospital in Castle Point. I'm on the Veterans Advisory Committee for mental health, and at Montrose for the region. I'm a member of the VFW Post 1615 in Blauvelt, which we have the Walkway of American Heroes. I'm a member of the Combat Infantrymen's Association. I'm a life member with disabled veterans, and a member of the American Legion with no post affiliation, just a member of the Legion.
Did you ever stay in contact with anyone that was in service with you?
I tried, especially David, and but he moved out to Texas, and I spoke to his mother, and I couldn't get a couple of the guys that got home before me when I was in hospital called my folks that lived in New York City, but other than that, No, and I never knew of any reunions. They did have reunions, but I didn't know. The 361st had one in Kansas at one time, but one of the ironic things in my career as a soldier, when we're in defense positions, the mail clerk said, "You know, you print very nice. I like the way you print." He said, "I'm going to go to Florence for a week or so on furlough." He said, "Will you take over my book duties and mark the books and stamp the mail and censor it and send back the killed in action, missing in action letters?" And I said, "Sure. Anything to keep me from going online for a week would be fine." So it happened to be that when I took over the duties of the mail clerk, the guys were going back up online for 8 or 10 days, and they gave me a little party, brought out some Italian red wine where they got it from the mountain, and they made me put on my combat badge, and they had a formation, and they took my combat badge off and said, "You're no longer combat, you're rear echelon." And so the guys went off that night to the front lines again, and that's almost almost 8-mile hike back and forth. The second day I had to go to division to pick up the mail, and when I picked up a couple of bags with supply, a lieutenant comes up to me and said, "Hi, soldier, what's your name?" And I told him, he said, "Where do you live?" And I said, "New Rochelle, New York." He said, "And you're 91st, 361st Infantry?" I said, "Yes." That was the end of it. It wasn't until we were out in somewhere late in the Po Valley, somewhere out there, we got a break, pulled off the side of the road, and a Jeep came up with some mail, and I got some letters, and one of the letters was from my mom with a clipping that said who I was. I was a mail clerk for the 361st Infantry. I handled so many hundred packages of daily mail and letters on a daily basis. And oh my God, my mother said, "I'm so glad you're a mail clerk, you're not fighting." And here I am, first scout all the way through. She was so happy. She never knew I was a scout, and she never knew I was really in combat, but the guys would kid me, and I used to get Christmas cards from some of them, "Merry Christmas to a scout or a mail clerk." So that was, I often wondered later, I never bothered me until later on. I said, "Gee, all the kids I went to high school with, they thought I was a mail clerk?" Oh my God. So, but.
Could you tell us where and when that was taken?
This was taken by an Italian photographer in, I think it was in Gorizia, Italy. They had a few photoshops here and there, and it was a gold mine for those guys because they're looking for soldiers to send home photographs.
So that was taken probably in 45 or late 44? Either way.
With
Okay.
of course they have a studio picture here.
Okay,
but-
you wanna hold up some of those
Oh,
photos?
I don't know if
Yeah,
you want-
yeah, that's good.
This is when I got home.
Okay. All right, got it.
Okay. And I don't know if you really want.
Well, there was that one of you in, I think in combat gear that was kind of a nice full-length photograph.
Oh,
I remember you showing.
that's when I was flying at that airport. And,
Oh, right there, yeah, that's a good
Yes. Now, where and when was that one taken?
this one was before I went overseas. It looked like a real veteran here because they had a test, expert infantryman test, and it's like a 3-day test of doing different things. And I ripped my pants going under barbed wire, and I just got back to the barracks to change, but I didn't become an expert infantryman because the last part of it was a night course with a map and a lensatic compass, and I went from point A to point B, figuring that was it, and there was C, D, E, and F in there too. And I said, this is it, and they said, no, you didn't pass. So I didn't.
Okay, well, thank you. All right,